Hey guys, welcome to probably what's going to be one of your favorite units of the year, 11.1 Ecological Relationships, and that's because it basically hinges upon you understanding the meaning of 5 words. That's predation, parasitism, commensalism, mutualism, and competition. If you can understand what those words mean and apply it to different situations, you're going to be doing great on the test for this unit. Okay, let's get started. Our first relationship is predation. Now, as you can see in the picture right here, oops, pen's not working again. There we go. We see a cheetah and a gazelle, and the cheetah is killing and is going to eat the gazelle. That is the essence of predation. One organism kills and then feeds on another. The one that does the killing is called the predator. The one that is killed and eaten is called the prey. And I say here that you might think that the predator always acts to reduce the prey population, but it's actually a two-way street because they depend upon each other. So if you look at the graph, you can see that when the prey population is high, the predator is actually low for a while, but then it rises up, and they kind of are staggered on the graph, okay? So the peak of the predator is not always the peak of the prey. They depend on each other, and one goes up after the other one goes up, okay? That's predation, pretty simple. Now, you might notice on this slide that I've got a plus and a minus. We're going to be doing this to keep track of the relationships. The plus means benefit, the minus means harmed. You can also look at this in smiley faces. So here we're going to have let's see if I can do this. It's not going to let me do eyes very well, but we can do a smiley face, and the other one would be a frowny face. There we go. So you've got a plus, a minus, or a smiley face and a frowny face because the predator is getting food, he's smiling, and the prey is dying, so he's not smiling. Another example that involves an invasive species, or maybe not invasive, but definitely alien species, is when a gardener brought a prickly pear cactus to Australia from South America, and because it didn't have a natural predator, it spread out of control. But then they were able to bring it under control by getting a moth from South America that ate the cactus, and that way they were able to balance out the populations. So now both the cactus and the moth are found in low population densities in Australia because they acted to limit each other's population. So predator and prey act to limit each other's population, but it's not just the predator reducing the prey. They have a relationship and they are connected in both directions, okay? Our next relationship says minus minus up here. And that is because you've got a situation where two organisms whose niches overlap are trying to obtain resources that are in limited supply, and they're the same type of resources. So, for example, you've got in this picture here, you've got a dead zebra, right here, and then you've got 4 or 5 different other organisms that want to eat the zebra. They're all struggling to get that resource, that food resource. Okay, so that's the essence of competition. Resources aren't always food, though. It could be for plants, it could be sunlight. Other resources include air, water, living space, and it can also be mates. Okay? Another thing that is important to realize is that competition can occur between members of different species or the same species, okay? So up here, this was different. It was different species going after that zebra. But right here with the white-tailed deer, they may be all struggling to eat the same grass, or they may be struggling to get the same mate. So it can be same species or different species. Don't let that trip you up. Some more examples of competition are bats and swallows, which are like a type of bird. They both eat insects, but because they don't do it at the same time of day, they're not really competing. Bats are nocturnal and the birds are not, so they're not competing. So that's a non-example. Another example is plants in a forest. They are always competing because, they're always competing for water, nutrients, and light as long as they're growing in the same place. So they're always competing with each other. So let's do a practice problem. Which of these relationships is an example of competition? Okay, let's go through these because there's a lot of different scenarios and we have to go through them one by one. A bird that picks and eats insects off of cattle. So the bird's getting food. It's kind of unclear whether the cattle is getting food at the same time. So that's a maybe. B, squirrels and chipmunks living in the same habitat and eating the same seeds. So for me, the fact that it says same right here is kind of a clue that that's probably the answer, but we're not going to stop quite yet. We're going to go through the rest of the choices. C says a tapeworm living inside an organism and absorbing nutrients from the organism. So the tapeworm is getting food, but the organism, it doesn't say. So I would say cross that one out. And D, a lion that hunts hyenas for food. I'm thinking, that's predation. And we're looking for competition. So let's go back. A bird that picks and eats insects off cattle. Iffy, but B, it's clearly the same seeds that they're competing for. So the answer is B. So we've gone through two relationships so far, predation and competition, and now we're going to move into a set of three relationships that all fall under the same umbrella, which is symbiotic relationships. And symbiosis is just a close relationship between two species that live together and in which one of the species is benefiting. Now this word benefit can sometimes be tricky because people aren't sure what it means. It's a plus. Okay, or it's a smiley face. It means something good is happening. Benefit is good. If you can commit that to memory, that will be helpful for you, okay? Because when you see questions about symbiotic relationships, they're going to use the word benefit, and they're also going to use the word harm. I think you guys probably know what harm means. It's a negative thing, but I've noticed that sometimes the word benefit can be tricky. So an example of a symbiotic relationship is the honeybee pollinating the flower. It gets nectar from the flower, so it's benefiting by getting food. And the flower is benefiting by being pollinated, so it can reproduce. So it's a win-win situation in this one. And we're going to find out what that win-win situation is called in just a sec. That is mutualism. We have our plus and plus. Oh my. It's not working. All right, there we go. Plus and plus. So mutualism is the relationship in which both of the species benefit. Something good is happening to both species. And I've got an interesting example here of lichens growing on a rock. Now, lichens are actually fungus and algae living together in a relationship. The fungus provides protection and the algae provides food, because the fungus is a heterotroph. It doesn't make its own food, but algae is a producer. It makes its own food. So they're both getting something. One's getting protection. The other one is getting a food source. So it's positive, positive, or smiley face, smiley face. And you might want to put in your notes both the pluses and the smiley faces, or the one that makes more sense to you for you to remember these relationships. Commensalism. I've got a plus sign and I've got, why does this never want to work for me? A plus sign and a neutral, N for neutral, okay, or nothing's going on. You can think of it as nothing. Because commensalism is a relationship in which one species is benefited and nothing happens to the other species, okay? So we've got a plus minus, or we could do a smiley face and kind of like a straight face, okay? So a good example of this is birds called cattle egrets that sit on the back of cattle as the cattle graze. As the cattle graze, they kick up little insects, and the birds then eat the insects. Now, if the birds had to get the insects on their own, it would be more of a challenge, so they're benefiting. But nothing's really happening to the cattle, so nothing's going on. So they're the N in the relationship, or the straight face, okay? So one is benefited, nothing happens to the other. That's commensalism. Okay, parasitism. Parasitism is really interesting. You might think of it as, usually you'll think of it as like a dog and a flea or a parasite in your digestive system. And I think you kind of have an intuitive sense that the parasite is getting some kind of benefit from the host. The host is like the dog, and the flea would be like sucking its blood, right? And it's getting nutrients or whatever. Or a parasite inside of you might be getting a place, like a habitat to live in addition to nutrients. So we know that one is benefiting and one is being harmed. So we've got our smiley face and we've got our frowny face. But there are other types of examples of parasitism that aren't just like things sucking blood and stuff like that. For example, a really interesting example that I put in this picture here is of brown-headed cowbirds and their eggs. Okay, so we've got the cowbird eggs and we've got the warbler eggs, and they're in the same nest, which doesn't make sense, except for the cowbird is very tricky, and what it does is it puts its eggs in the warbler's nest, and the warbler takes care of the cowbird. It's babies. So the cowbird is benefiting by, having its genes live on, if you want to look at it that way. And the warbler is being hurt because it's like expending energy and resources to take care of the cowbird's eggs, and that's how it's being hurt. So it's not always one thing sucking on another. There are different scenarios. So that's parasitism, a plus and a minus, or a smiley face and a frowny face. All right, one last practice question before we wrap it up. Bees fly from flower to gather nectar. In the process, they help the plants reproduce by spreading pollen. The relationship between bees and flowering plants is an example of what? Now, we went over this example earlier on another slide, so maybe you remember it was a plus-plus situation because the bees are getting nectar, which is food, and the flowering plants are being pollinated. So which relationship is plus-plus? You probably can narrow it down that it's not competition, and it's one of the symbiotic relationships, right? But most of the time kids get confused between commensalism and mutualism. You have to remember, the feeling is mutual means that two people feel the same way, so they're both plus. You can think of it that way, and know that it's mutualism. Or you can just study the vocabulary. It might be a good idea to make flashcards for these 5 words, study more examples, but basically just, if you know the definition, you can usually apply it to the situation, and it's just a matter of practice, and it's not that difficult of a concept. It's just a matter of knowing the vocabulary. So I think you're going to have success with this unit, and I'll leave it there. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.